Because we've only got 20 minutes, I'm not going to do my whole introduction. You just take what Wayne said. Let's just launch into it, right? To understand the impact that alcohol is having on the adolescent brain, just need to understand that you have 4 brains inside your head. The one we get all excited about is brain number 4. Brain number 4 on this diagram is basically the blue one. It's like a helmet that goes over top of brains 1, 2, and 3. But it's really the front half of that helmet that teachers and parents get all excited and concerned about. And really, its real name's the frontal cortex, but I wouldn't fill your head up with scientific terms, just think brain number 4. And the reason we get all excited about brain number 4 is because brains 1, 2, and 3, your dog has those 3 brains as well. So that makes it nice and easy for you to work out why we get excited about brain number 4, because it does everything you can do that your dog can't do. So everything, that makes you brilliant in lots of ways is up there in that frontal cortex, right? So if you want to know for functions in the frontal cortex, you don't have to overcomplicate it. The only question you have to memorize is, can the dog do it? Because if the answer to the question, can the dog do it, is yes, then it's not in the frontal cortex, because he doesn't really have one. If you can do it and the dog can do it, it's brains 1, 2, or 3. Brain number 4 is the stuff you can do, the dog can't do, right? That's simple. So here's a testing question for you. Does feeling happy have to be in brain number 4? No, because you can do it and the dog can do it, so that must be brains 1, 2, or 3. Does reading have to be in brain number 4? So you're asking yourself, can the dog do it? And no, the dog can't. Doesn't matter how good the reading recovery class is, the dog's never ever going to learn to read because he doesn't have enough of this brain number 4, right? Everything on a school report is going to be in the frontal cortex because the dog's not going to do well at anything on a school report, right? So just think brain number 4 is the brain that makes you brainy. Right? Brainy being everything you can do, the dog can't do. That's only half of it though. The other half of the frontal cortex's role is to keep you out of jail and to make you a nice person. Because as well as making you brainy, it also controls your emotions, understands consequences, sets goals, has empathy. It really is everything that makes you brainy and everything that makes you a nice person to be around and keeps you out of jail. Now, that brain is the one that is mostly affected by the environment. The lower in the brain it is, the more it's affected by genes, the higher in the brain, the more it's affected by the environment. Quickly, brains 1, 2, and 3. Brain number 1 is down the base of your neck. It's number 1 because the brain has evolved from the bottom to the top, comes online across your life bottom to top. It's just a universal principle of brains, they work bottom to top. So at the base, brainstem is your survival brain. Keeps your heart beating, keeps you breathing, does all your survival stuff. Just think brain number 1, survival. Brain number 2, the bulgy bit at the back of your head, the cerebellum, just think of that as the movement brain. So brain number 1, survival, brain number 2, movement. If that's all you've got, survival and movement, and that's it, you're a reptile. That's called the reptilian brain. Your pet lizard's got survival and movement, and that's it. To have brain number 3 in the centre there, you have to be a mammal. So it's often just called the mammal brain. Its real name's the limbic system, and it's the home of your emotions. It's your feeling brain. So that means mammals have feelings that reptiles don't have. Your pet lizard has got survival and movement, and that's it. But your pet dog has got survival, movement, and emotion. So when you get home tonight, you can tell the dog's real pleased you're home. You can't tell if the lizard is pleased you're home or not. It'll just look at you cold and hard, show no emotion. It's never ever going to get excited that you got home, because excitement is a limbic emotion which a reptile doesn't have. Right? So survival, movement, emotion, thinking and learning. Once all 4 brains are online, alcohol's not that damaging. For adults, alcohol is really not that damaging to the brain. So you have it in massive amounts. As an adult male can take up to 8 units an hour without doing any damage to the human brain. That's a lot of alcohol. Whereas a teenager, because their brain is still under construction, is a whole lot more vulnerable. So if an adult can take 8 units an hour without doing any damage, a teenager can only tolerate 1 unit an hour without doing any damage. So if your teenager opens a stubby at 7 o'clock and is still nursing that stubby at 8 o'clock, then the stuff I'm about to tell you probably doesn't apply, because they're staying under 1 unit. But if your teenager opens a stubby at 7 and is still nursing that same stubby at 8, I'm guessing they're not from New Zealand, because that's not how New Zealanders drink, right? That's not the culture that has been developed. We are a binge drinking culture in New Zealand. If you ask in Europe, you do research on what is the average number of drinks that are socially acceptable to have in an evening, the average number comes back as 3. If you do that same research in New Zealand, the average number comes back as 13. So we think, so what I'm saying is if you're in Europe and you're going out for 4 hours and only having 3 drinks, yeah, you're under the 1 unit. But in New Zealand, if you're going out for 4 hours and we have 13 drinks in the same time, it's not very likely that they're staying under that amount. So that frontal cortex is going to be fully developed at, obviously it's a different age for everybody, but it's going to be, the average is about mid to late 20s. But you don't have to wait that long for your brain to be safe for alcohol. Actually, for the majority of your children, their brains will be pretty safe from the effects of alcohol by the age of 18. We're not talking about marijuana tonight. When we talk about marijuana, it's nice and easy because it's just 18. After 18, it doesn't do you any harm. With alcohol, it's more 18 to 21. It's a wee bit different research. There is a smaller group of kids that are still affected by alcohol right until 21, but the majority of kids we find by 18. So what I'm saying is the brain doesn't have to be fully constructed, it just has to be constructed enough to tolerate the poison that is alcohol. If they cross 1 unit before the age of 18, then there's 2 major things that we see happen to the brain. One is it damages the hippocampus. So the hippocampus is the memory in the brain. When I talk to you about the damage that alcohol does to the brain, you will notice that it damages specifically the areas required for learning and schoolwork. And that's not a coincidence. That's because learning and schoolwork are about the only optional thing your brain does. If you're introducing poison into the brain and it's got to sacrifice something, it's not going to sacrifice a beating heart or sacrifice emotions or the things you need for survival. The only sacrificable things we have are learning, higher intelligence. You know, you can live a long, long time without empathy, literacy, numeracy. You won't live long without a beating heart. So it's no coincidence that the first thing the brain sacrifices are the ability to learn and retain information. So retaining information requires a hippocampus. That's your memory. The hippocampus, researchers really love the hippocampus because, basically because size correlates with function, which just means that if your hippocampus is, 40% larger than mine, then you've got 40% more memory capacity. If it's 20% smaller, you've got 20% less. Not all the rest of the brain works like that, so it just makes it nice and convenient for researchers that size and function correlate. Basically, we know the only people who have got a fully developed hippocampus and can access their full memory, so we'll be able to use that for exams and stuff, the only people that access their full memory are people who didn't pass 1 unit until the age of 18. Teenagers that have donated their brains to science and have passed away, and we can take out their hippocampus. When you line up those hippocampi from the smallest to the largest, that correlates with how young they were when they crossed 1 unit. So the only people who've got a fully developed memory are the ones who didn't cross 1 unit till 18. If you crossed it at 17, it's slightly smaller, 16 slightly smaller, 15 slightly smaller. You get the idea? Yeah, so it seems to stunt the growth of your memory when you introduce alcohol during adolescence. The other thing is that the other one that we know that it damages is the frontal cortex, the home of higher intelligences, responsible for learning. Its size and function don't correlate in the frontal cortex, but yeah, so it's just sufficient to say that it's damaged by the alcohol. That's the 2 brain areas that we know and have clear evidence for that are damaged by alcohol. Some of the other stuff that really stands out in the research is really around which strategies are most effective for parents. I thought that'd be most productive for you. There's no point just telling you all the damage it's going to do to your kid's brain. What does the research say are ways that you as a parent can minimise that harm risk to your children? So the number 1 way in the literature is pretty obvious: don't model it. The number 1 risk factor for your child to grow up to have an alcohol problem is to have grown up in a home where they saw their parent model the abuse of alcohol. Now you might think, oh no, we don't model the abuse of alcohol. Remember, you live in New Zealand, so you might not think that having 6 cans on a night is abuse of alcohol, but that's because you live in a binge drinking country where that's accepted and totally normal. But to the rest of the world, that is the abuse of alcohol. So yeah, that's the number 1 risk factor. It really comes down to a lot to do with parenting styles. So in the literature, we talk about authoritarian, authoritative, permissive. They're a bit meaningless, so I like these other terms: brick wall, jellyfish, backbone. Brick wall parents, you can probably guess. Brick wall, shut up, do as you're told, don't answer back, nope, just shut up and do it. Brick wall gives a really nice firm boundary, but as anyone living in an earthquake city knows, there are no flexibility in bricks, they're just a solid boundary. Those kids have the worst outcomes. Most of the people in prison, if they can identify a major parenting style, it was their parent had, it was the brick wall style. And that's because the brick wall style does not require you to use your frontal cortex. Shut up and do as you're told, your dog can do that. So it doesn't require a whole lot of intelligence. So that's why it's associated with the worst outcomes. Jellyfish has no spine. That's the parent that says, no, you're not going, and then they go and there's no consequence or no follow through, so the kids are kind of in charge. Interestingly, they don't get as bad outcomes as the brick wall parents. So if you can't do the healthy modelled one, you're going to be either too strict or too loose. You seem to get better outcomes being too loose. But the one that gets overwhelmingly the best outcomes and overwhelmingly gives your children way more resilience and puts them into a statistical group that makes them very unlikely to have drug and alcohol problems is around the parenting style of what they call the backbone style. The backbone style, a backbone gives you support and structure, but it is flexible and responsive. So like if So for instance, if my child says to me, right, I want to go to this party and there's going to be alcohol, and I go, oh right, okay, you're only taking 2 stubbies, that's it. No, discussion ended, you're taking 2 stubbies, that's plenty. Then that's the brick wall style. That child doesn't have to demonstrate any decision making, they don't have to be involved in any negotiation. So yeah, they get the worst outcomes. If I say to the kid, okay, what do you think is the appropriate number of stubbies for you to take to a party the first time you've gone? I mean, admittedly, he or she is probably going to come back with 12, but, which is not good, and then I can go 1, and then they can go 11, and I can go 1. But even negotiating is using that frontal cortex. Now we get to the end of the negotiation, and they take 3 stubbies to the party instead of 2. Looks like I've lost in the short term because he's taken 3 and I only wanted 2, but the research tells us that in the big picture of things, we're winning because that kid is exercising their frontal cortex, being involved in decision making. What the research shows us is if you negotiate and have and you're going to negotiate 3 stubbies, even when they break the boundary and sneak more behind your back, they never go more than double, well not never, but hardly ever go more than double what you negotiated. So if you negotiated 3, even when they misbehave, they sneak and have 6. Whereas the brick wall parents that just said, no, you can't go, and the kid snuck out the window in the middle of the night, they go to having 12. So, yeah. Okay. It's kind of, I'll probably race through all that information really quickly. Have you got any questions? Yep, there isn't a lot of, no, it's the same. There is no gender difference for the 18 to 20 thing. It's hard to answer because there are not a lot of brain scans on the female brain. We talk about the brain does this and the brain does that, but really 95% of all brain scans are done on male brains because you need to have a baseline for a brain scan, and that's affected by your hormones. So a woman, to get a baseline, because her hormone levels are like that, then it takes about 10 brain scans to establish a baseline. A men's hormonal levels go like this. So it takes 1 brain scan to establish a baseline. So it's way more expensive to research the female brain when you've got to do 10 brain scans to establish a baseline. So the short version of that is we don't know much about the female brain, it's too bloody complicated. Yeah, but as far as we know from the literature, there isn't a huge difference between males and females. Mm-hmm. Anyone else? No, cut to play. I don't even know how long I've been talking, Wayne. That's the information. All right there.
You mentioned before about the brain being shut down for renovations. You want to run that story?
Oh, okay, yeah, that's just the general adolescent stuff. So yeah, I suppose I should have said that. That frontal cortex, it's sort of centre stage from about 7 to 27 when it's fully developed, right? Brains 1, 2, and 3, like brain number 2 is movement. Most of that was centre stage. Most of the movement skills you ever learned in your whole life, the motor skills you learned in a 12-month period. And that was between the ages of 6 months and 18 months. At 6 months of age, you're a blob in your parents' arms doing bugger all movement. 1 year later, you can walk, crawl, run, climb, use fine finger movements. So brain number 2 has really taken centre stage development from 6 months to 18 months. So what are we doing in the first 6 months? We're doing what every creature does first, survival. A horse gets up and walks straight away because its survival method is to run away from predators. We've got a way better survival method, so we put movement off to brain number 2. Our survival method is attachment, so we spend the first 6 months convincing someone to fall so madly, deeply in love with us that they would rather die than let any harm come to us. That's way more effective than running away. So we put running away off to number 2 and do attachment as number 1. So then you're up to about 18 months. Between 18 months and 2, you move into the emotional brain. So you think of the tantruming 2s. Have you ever tried to use logic with a 3-year-old? It just doesn't work because they're in their emotional brain. You'll see that. Give one 3-year-old a full biscuit and the other 3-year-old 2 halves of a broken biscuit, and you will see the emotional brain in full action because the kid you give the broken biscuit to in his feeling brain is devastated because you gave him the wrecked one, the damaged one, all emotional words. You can't just use logic with the 3-year-old. You getting down on your hands and knees and holding the 2 halves of the biscuit going, look, it's one bloody biscuit, does not make the 3-year-old suddenly develop logic and go, oh, right, a half and a half makes a whole, so I'm all good. They stay in their emotional brain. They don't understand thinking in halves and wholes. They're just absorbed in the experience that you gave them, the wrecked one, the damaged one. So that emotional brain. And then, between 7 and 8, we move into this more logical frontal cortex. If that just went from 7 to 27, there'd be no such thing as adolescence. So to understand adolescence is basically halfway between 7 and 27 for about a 3-year period, smack bang in the middle. That frontal cortex is going to be shut for renovations, and that's what you experience as adolescence. So that means your teenager goes backwards in doing the things that a frontal cortex does, like controlling your emotions. I imagine your 9-year-old controls their emotions far more effectively than your 15-year-old does, because controlling emotions requires a frontal cortex. Your 9-year-old hasn't got a fully developed one yet, but it hasn't generally shut for renovations yet. So they've got more access to it than this 15 or 16-year-old does. That's why 15 and 16-year-olds have skyrocketing rates of anxiety, depression, suicide, mental health, because the brakes on your emotions are the frontal cortex, and that's going to be shut for renovations for 3 years. That's kind of good news in a way, because it means that your teenager's going to get better, without you necessarily trying. Don't look at your teenager halfway through adolescence and think, oh my God, what have I produced? Because being an adolescent is all about being in the emotional brain, and being an adult is all about being in the frontal cortex. So it's actually it's fairer to look at your teenager and the 10% of the time that they're the best behaved. That's more of a reflection of who they'll be as an adult, not the 90%, because that's where they'll live as an adult, in that brain, not in the limbic emotional brain. I say it's shut for renovations. It's not 100% shut. It's a good way to introduce it, but it's not, obviously, if the frontal cortex was shut for renovations 100%, then all language is in the frontal cortex. That means every teenager would lose the power of speech for 3 years. Now, clearly that doesn't happen. So, well, even if you've got a teenage son and you think that has happened, the fact that he still says, yeah, nah, dunno, means there's still some frontal cortex going on, right? So it's a good way to introduce it, to say it's shut for renovations, but refine it by going it's shut for renovations 90% of the time. 10% of the time, your teenager's really just as mature as you are. They're just as good at controlling their emotions as you are. They're just as good at planning for the future as you are. 10% of the time, your teenager is an adult. Becoming an adult from being a teenager, neurologically, doesn't mean your cortex has to get better. It has to move from only being online 10% of the time to being online 90% of the time. As an adult, your frontal cortex, that's mainly where you live, and understanding consequences, impact on others, focusing your attention. But you don't live there 100% of the time. 10% of the time, you move into your emotional brain and you make decisions in exactly the same way a teenager does. You ignore logic and outcomes and sensible stuff, and you just do what feels good. Any time in your life you had a cream cake, that decision come from your limbic emotional brain. Your frontal cortex is completely logical. It knows that the leading cause of death for humans is heart disease, and the leading cause of heart disease is white sugar. So your frontal cortex would see that cream cake and go, oh look, there's death on a plate. And you would never ever eat it. The reason you eat the cream cake is because you downshift from your logical, consequential mind to your emotional feeling brain, and you forget all about heart disease and obesity and white sugar, and just focus completely on how good it's going to feel to eat that cake. So while you're eating that cake, you are, in the teenage brain. I'm just trying to get you to see you're not a different species from your teenager, you're just different ratios. They're 90% emotional brain and 10% logical brain. You're 90% logical brain, only 10% emotional brain. Yeah, I suppose my general advice for parenting and managing through this stuff would be talk to that frontal cortex, exercise that frontal cortex when it turns up. If it's only going to be there 10% of the time, you need to prioritise that and give it attention. If you have to give that like 1,000 hours before you end adolescence, then you want to, when it turns up, try and get as much time in as possible. It won't be at a time that's convenient for you. Like normally for me, it was when I was carrying my suitcase on the way to the door to catch a plane. And then my daughter would suddenly say something calm and reasonable and focused on other people's needs. And I'd think, bloody hell, there's the frontal cortex. I haven't seen that for weeks. All I've seen is the limbic system. You know that you're dealing with the limbic system because it sighs a lot and shrugs its shoulders a lot and rolls its eyes a lot. And so when she suddenly says something calm and reasonable, I think, oh. So if I just go, oh, that's nice, honey, and run out the door, I just exercised it for 3 seconds going, oh, that's nice, honey. So adolescence is going to take a long, long time if that's all the attention you're giving to it. Whereas I normally am leaving 10 minutes early, so if I stop, put my bag down, turn around and engage and get a whole 10 minutes while that cortex is there, adolescence will end earlier. You don't want to be giving all your attention to the emotional brain, because the emotional brain does not need your help. It's already got a turbocharger on it, so it doesn't need you fighting and bitching and arguing with your teenager. If you're fighting and bitching and arguing, you're now in your limbic system. So all interactions involve all good interactions involve at least one cortex. So since your teenagers is largely shut for renovations, it's a good idea if you can try and stay in that and minimise the 90% stuff. You understand that? Yeah. You don't get to choose when it is, you also don't get to choose what they talk about. Don't worry about what they talk about, just worry, are they using the frontal cortex? Are they thinking about others? Are they planning for the future? Is there strategic planning? Of course they're going to want to talk about stuff that you don't want to talk about. Every generation chooses role models that you don't approve of. If you approved of Kim Kardashian, she wouldn't be a role model. That's the whole purpose, right? I wouldn't be too worried about, be careful not being that parent that is too much concerned about the topic and gets too obsessed about the bad messages that Kim Kardashian is sending. You know, remember, your great-grandmother was sure that Elvis's pelvis was going to destroy the civilized world, and it didn't, you know, and either will Kim Kardashian's ass, right? So don't worry about what they're talking about, worry about are they. Like, for my daughter, so I won't say which one, so it remains anonymous. My daughter for her last year of high school, the only time we engaged her frontal cortex was when she talked about her ball dress. It's the only way you really got any decent amount of strategic thinking. You might think, how much strategic thinking is involved in a ball dress? But it's quite a lot, I found out. There's all, you know, you've got to get your dress up on the website, and if you get your dress up in that colour, no one else is allowed that dress in that colour. They're allowed that dress in another colour, but not that colour. So it is strategic thinking. I didn't want to spend the whole year talking about ball dresses, but if that's the only way I can get her to engage her frontal cortex and think about planning for the future and action for others, then that's what I need to do. You don't get to choose when, you don't get to choose what about, just worry about exercising that frontal cortex. The other one, I'll just leave you with that last one, is that teenagers are 90% emotion. So if you as their parent don't speak to that emotion, you just skipped 90% of their worldview. You just skipped 90% of what they were saying. So don't be surprised when your kids don't listen to you, because that's exactly what you're modelling. When they go, oh, this kid smacked me in the head, so I got a detention, you know, so I smacked him, this kid called me a dick, so I smacked him in the head and got a detention. When you go straight to, well, you shouldn't have done that, you should have gone to talk to the team, you should have gone to the teacher, and acknowledging that emotion, you didn't listen to their emotion, they won't listen to your cortex. If you want them to listen to your cortex and that strategy of you should have gone to talk to the dean, then it's way more effective to verbally acknowledge their emotion first. You know, you understand that? It's just, yeah, say, oh, that seems to have made you really angry. Why didn't you go to the dean? You know, if it's just about acknowledge the emotion first. It's when you acknowledge the emotion, you calm their survival brain. The plainest way I can say it is if I've got you on a brain scan and you're angry, and you're getting angrier and angrier, there's more and more activity in your lower brain, so there's no cortex available to talk to. When I say to the kid, oh, that, and I name their emotion, oh, that seems like that made you really angry, just that reduces the electrical activity in the lower brain and gives you more access to the frontal cortex just by naming the emotion. So yeah, before you go into problem solving, name the emotion first. Okay, thanks for your time and attention, everybody. I'll hand the floor back over to Wayne.
I do owe Nathan an apology because he typically does have an hour and a half whenever he does this presentation. The advantage that you have is that we are filming this evening, so when that film is made available, if you watch it at 3/4 speed, it'll make a lot of sense. Thanks for that, though, mate. I love that. I love that construct of the brain being shut down for renovations. The brain's still there. It's just not making the best decisions it might. And I think, you know, our theme this evening is around strategizing, helping kids make good decisions around getting the best part out of themselves. Someone who can help us do that is our next speaker. Welcome Mata to the stage.
G'day everyone. Thanks Mr. Waller for pointing out that I'd been stitched up today. I found out about an hour ago what I'd be speaking about, and I find out about 2 minutes ago that it's being filmed as well. So, awesome. I guess I'm not really experienced or an expert on any of this stuff. The one thing I am an expert on is being parented by brain guy over here, Mr. Nathan Wallace. So like I said, I don't really know what I'm going to talk to you guys about tonight, so I'll sort of just go off the cuff. My first thought is what it's like being parented by someone who's obviously is focused on the brain. I guess as a kid, a lot of this information was, I wouldn't say shoved down my throat, but was very apparent. So he obviously had a really conscious mind of any sort of drinking that you do before 18 is obviously not good for you at all. We spoke about the hippocampus and whatnot before. I guess I'm sort of on that other side of saying, well, yeah, drinking's not great, obviously. It's terrible for your development, but it is, in some parts, a way of life for some people. So I guess what I'm here to say is two things. Probably the first thing is in proportion. So I understand there's always big events. I don't know what kids are doing nowadays, but back at my school after the college match, for example, you'd have a big after party. I guess what I'd stress to you guys is the proportion that you do it within. Obviously, the figure that he gave away was sort of doing 12 drinks and going crazy and going nuts on yourself. I wouldn't say that the starting point that I had was 3. It might have been more closer to 6. But I think that's a really important skill that you'll need to learn for the rest of your life, is how to ration your alcohol, but also especially at this point of life because of how important it is for the development of your brain. The second thing that I was going to talk about as I was brainstorming as I was going was in proportion, and then also choosing when exactly those dates are. So like I said, Dad was super strict on it. I wasn't allowed to go out every weekend as a kid, but he did exercise what I spoke about negotiation. So there'd be certain key events where I was able to go away, such as New Year's or after the college match. I think that's a really important skill in itself, learning. I mean, obviously you might have a lot of your mates who are partaking in all of these activities, but learning when to choose, when it's necessarily right, when it's an ideal time for you. I guess the other thing that I was going to say, sorry, bear with me guys, like I said, this is not planned, was, now I'm really stumped.
I think it's about the first 15, and was it about being in the first 15 of the culture to drink? Obviously, like, there was a massive, especially when I was at school, culture around it. So sort of ways to navigate around that is, like I said, proportions of drinks that you drink. I mean, everyone sort of would go and get an outrageous amount. Someone would have a fake ID and would go or buy a whole bunch of alcohol. I guess it's just about determining how much is that is an appropriate amount for you. And then I guess the other thing that I was going to say for parents is, some of you parents might be here and you might be those types of parents who say, no, the research says drinking's terrible for you. If you want to do that, you can do it off your own wallet when you leave for university. I think what I was talking about, the negotiation and the sort of ordeal that you have with your parents of, hey, this is the college boys high match, this only happens once a year, literally all of my mates are going. That ability to negotiate and decide when is a key time to be indulging in a couple of beverages, I think is a really important skill for when your child leaves and goes off to university. I think that's a thing, as you go into university, you boys will all realise, those who do go on, that there's opportunities on opportunities on opportunities to drink. It's just the way our society is at the moment. There's so many nights where you can go out and all that sort of stuff you can do. It's a real life skill in yourself, though, to control that and sort of determine what you are. The example I'd think of from uni is obviously during exam times. There's obviously some big nights where sort of everyone's going out, but you have your own exams to worry about as well. I think just that ability to exercise self-control is a really important habit that, whilst it's a sensitive subject like alcohol, it would be a good thing to start educating and informing on your kids now. Anything else you want me to prompt me on to? Don't really know what to say, been up here for too long, sort of shaking. Yeah, go for it. Yeah. Yeah. I think, everyone thinks it's cool to drink, so you sort of have to drink at the rate that everyone else is going at. I think the most important thing off the bat is sort of self-presence. I think if you're the sort of person who's not sort of worried about that, that's the main thing. But obviously I understand at this age kids can have some struggles with that and confidence. I think the way I sort of negotiate it was just being sort of confident in everything I do. I'd sort of, when, people would be like, oh, well, how come you're not getting a, let's say, second box, for example, or something like that, I would say, well, that's just not like sort of the rules or parameters that have been set out by me. And then I'd sort of go back to reasons that I'm not drinking that related to my own personal decision with it as opposed to my parents' decision with it. So like I sort of mentioned, like for me it was a sports thing. I didn't want to be, pissing up every weekend, sort of deteriorating my body, feeling it on the Sunday or Monday or whatever because of a sports thing. So whenever it came to me saying, oh, no, mate, not tonight, or me saying, oh, no, that's enough for tonight, that came from my own sort of self-worth of, oh, I don't want to do it because of my own reasons. So I guess if you're a parent and you're having that sort of ordeal with your child, you've just got to find what their soft points are. So they might not be interested in sports at all, but there might be something else. So, yeah, massively. I feel like
I should be pulling out evidence of me doing that or something at the moment, but you can take my word for it. But yeah, I think it all depends on the sort of mates you have, but as long as you've got like a confident and a reasoning behind it, yeah. Sweet, that's enough out of me. Cheers, guys.
You don't just have to take Mata's word for it. I was his dean, and I can reinforce what he said there about being the guy who did go forward and say to his mates, no, that's not a sensible decision. You shouldn't be doing that. And being a strong influence on your friends is actually a sign of strength. So, I mean, it's a fantastic number of the hostel guys that come over here tonight, and I'm really glad that Mr. Kilkelly has brought you boys over. But the fact that you're hearing this from people who've been where you are in the school and hearing about the pressure that goes with drinking is really significant at this stage, I hope. Somebody who dealt with the pressure of drinking in his own way is going to present now, and that's George. He's got a story that will alarm, but as I say, I think at the same time inspire you. So welcome, George Kenny.
Inga mana, inga reo, inga raurangi tiki mā. Ko, George Aho, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you so much for having me here this evening. I spoke here a couple of years ago, but I'm just as excited to come back and hopefully share with you a few of my life experiences and a couple of tips on how you can change your life and maybe even save it. So first we'll go back to where it started. September 2008, I was having the best time of my life. I played sports, I did rowing, I played tennis, I was hanging out with my friends every weekend. I was a bit of a party animal, I'll be honest. And I loved class, some classes in specific, sure, I loved English much more than all the rest, but I loved going to school, being there with my friends, learning there with my friends, and just making a difference in my own life. Absolutely, I loved reading. Man, I loved reading every single weekend. All these things I loved. I'll be honest, I even had a girlfriend. But then came the night that changed my life forever. It was October the 1st, 2008. Halfway through my exams, I went out to a party. It was my friend's 18th. Bad idea from the start. I had all my friends there, my girlfriend there. I was having a ball, and I was drunk. I needed a ride home, so I asked my friend if I could have a ride home, asked if he'd been sober, which I'd seen. He hadn't had a drink the whole night. That was a friend who lied to me. He was very drunk. Then I hopped in the car, didn't put on my seatbelt. It's so simple. Unbelievable how such a simple thing can save so many lives. And he started driving like a maniac. You shouldn't be embarrassed to ask your friend to pull over because he is the one that should be embarrassed about putting your life at risk. When we crashed into a power pole exactly where I was seated. I was in a coma for a month and a day, a long time in hospital, a long time in hospital, and a year and a half in rehabilitation later, I came out to realize that my whole life, I will be rehabilitating still. I have brain damage and I have carers looking after me, making sure that I remember to brush my teeth, take my meds, doing the things that come naturally to you. I'm not the man that I dreamed of being. I can't play sports, I've got gaps in my skull, a foul would be a lot worse than a foul for me. I have partial loss of sight, therefore I can't read, which is one of the things I miss most. And it's simple how four simple things to do will change your life forever, hopefully save your life, and who knows, maybe even someone else's. First, don't get drunk. 1, 2 drinks, you're fine. Make the third drink a Coca-Cola, who knows, whatever you like. Second is organize someone as a sober driver before the night even begins. Flip a coin, paper, scissors, rock. If you volunteer to be a sober driver and stick by your word, I will admire you forever. You have so much respect from me. Third, we know it. Click goes your seatbelt. It's that easy. And fourth is If your friend is driving in a way that makes you feel unsafe, tell them that. Get a cab. Call your mom. Who knows? Thank you so much for having me here this evening.
That's an incredibly brave testimony from a young man whose life has changed, but who is working very hard to change other people's lives as well. Thanks, George. That was incredible. Cheers. Graham's going to speak to us now. Let's do that.
I'm not quite as adept at doing this as George, which is a bit interesting, all things considered. But nonetheless, here I am, Graham Clark, and my chat is aimed significantly at the old people in the room or the parents, but I'll put in a couple of bits specifically for the youngsters to help, hopefully, generate that you're not alone if you're finding times a bit difficult. Once upon a time I farmed in South Otago, and 7 years ago I stopped doing that, and I'm now a recovering organic farmer and living in Terrace with my wife, Giselle. I have 3 boys, Jared, Logan and Mitchell. And the question you might be asking, well, why are you here? I'm speaking for my son, who to this day is unable to communicate effectively. It'd be better if he was here to do it, actually, to be honest, but that's another story. Also, there is a bit of commonality between my story and George's, but there's also some different perspectives and outcomes. And the things that I'd like to achieve is set a scene of a pretty normal sort of a young fella, chat about society views and your peers, a brief look at consequence, and have a wee challenge for you. There's a slight departure coming up now, because this next slide is possibly the most important that I can give you, and it's this one, which is not what you're expecting. This is a UK GP who's interested in health rather than illness, and his podcast is Feel Better, Live More. I'm hoping it'll be on the school website tomorrow so that you can find it, because I really hope that all of you will have a look at it. Specifically, given what's going on in this school, yesterday's press talking about a gentleman who has spent 36 of his last 50 years in jail due to the things that happened to him primarily at Lake Alice, and some of the other things that are being talked about yesterday. The gentleman who's doing the talking in here, Gabor Mate, arguable pronunciation, is an addiction specialist. And when he sees people doing what we might call stupid things, his question is not why the behaviour, but why the pain. And he's talking about what is it that makes us do the stupid things, because believe it or not, we very seldom do them spontaneously. And at this point, I'll divert even more from what I've ever done before, and particularly for the 16-year-olds in the audience, or the adults that had some challenges in their younger days. From 16 to 23, I drank like a fish, and I realise now, because I found out 10 years ago that I'm dyslexic, and that wasn't recognised super well when I was at school, therefore school was reasonably hard going, and in spite of being quite good at sports and anything to do with maths, everything else was a disaster. So you don't feel very good about yourself. In order to deal with that and develop some social capacity, particularly around women or girls at the time, it was really much better to be absolutely pissed. So I set about that with a fair amount of enthusiasm for a few years and was very lucky to live through it. I recommend you don't take that approach. It's pretty high risk. It's guaranteed to do a lot of damage, and it might do a lot more. But for those who are struggling in this area, you're not alone, you're not the first, and I did stop that. Probably easier if you can do that with your parents than the way I did it. But what I would encourage all of you to do is to have a listen to this particular podcast, talk about it with your kids, understand what they're talking about, because it really is enormously powerful. This is Mitchell, my littlest guy, and I'm just going to skip through pretty quickly so you get a picture of a guy who was right into life when he was a wee fella. I particularly love this one because those of you who are old enough will recognise that's Josh Cronfeld, and this is back in the days when Otago thrashed Canterbury on a routine basis. It was a wonderful period in history, I'm sure you'll agree. This is a little guy who's pretty keen to win. Good tactics pushing that little fella out of the way. Into that. A bit of modelling on the side. Pretty much into anything that was going, i.e. he was a bit the same as most of you guys. Stretching as far as he could. I had to throw that at increasing distance from his body until he couldn't catch it, and then would do it again so that he could stretch a bit further. Another one out. Big brother telling the chaps how to play cricket. Strictly speaking, this is slightly off-piece, but I just love it. That's Goofy the cat and a rabbit. Back to Mitch. careful thinking before he had a crack at something, and then into it, up the walls. This led to another interesting incident a few years later when I took Mitch with me for a drive around the South Island, and I'd had sleep apnea for approaching a decade by that stage, and I was reasonably tired. And it seemed quite helpful to get Mitch to drive for me for a while so I could just have a wee bit of a rest. And that went really well. As long as he didn't drive for more than an hour, it was fine. And I said when we were approaching home, "Now, Mitch, you realise you're not to speak to your mother about this, don't you?" "Yep, that'd be right." He didn't keep that promise, and he did speak to his mother. She was not pleased because he was 13 at the time. But they can survive, they can keep thinking for an hour, and after that, not so good. Right, back to the fun stuff. In summary, Mitchell's into anything and everything that's going. Eventually, he arrived at an age where he had to learn about work, which he hoed into like a hungry dog. This one typifies Mitchell. This was after about 10 minutes chasing that lamb around the pen, and his brothers elected not to help him, and eventually he did wear the lamb down and had a win. That's the old fellow when he was younger. More learning about work and the lunchtime consequence of that learning. Pondering about the future. And here we come to his middle elder brother's 21st. And I just wanted to pause here for a wee moment because some of you in the audience will have been to 21st. And I was expecting, to be honest, there was going to be more of the youngsters in here, which is who I was sort of aiming this piece at. But it applies to the grown-ups as well. There is a bit of a fashionable thing to do is to have shots at 21st. For those of you who don't know what shots are, just a nip of alcohol down the hatch. And I was going to ask, have any of you been and seen one of those? And I wasn't going to ask anyone to put hands up because I don't want to embarrass anyone. I just want to encourage a bit of thought. And the thought that I want in the context of what's coming next is how often is the encouragement and the chanting to drink more coming from an adult in the room as opposed to necessarily the youngsters? And worth reflecting on that. It's already been touched on that we adults and parents demonstrate for the most part what our youngsters and their peers pick up on. I was in Dunedin one weekend, this particular weekend actually as it happens, 2011, and I got a phone call from the Clinton policeman, which was my local one at that stage, and he had a bit of information for me. It was a bit of a funny one because that's the holiday weekend and I was a bit perplexed about that, but we were grazing some cattle for a guy who was having some troubles, and his family were disintegrating a bit, and his sister was accusing him of stealing cattle, and we in turn are being accused of grazing the stolen cattle, which is, we weren't. But it didn't trouble me too much. I was getting a phone call at that stage of the day. Anyway, what he was ringing to talk to me about was the evening before, Mitchell had been out at his 19th birthday, and the police at that stage knew that Mitch and his immediate working boss arrived to the local pub at 7:35 as the Highlanders kicked off and inflicted yet another telling victory against the Crusaders, you guessed it. I may not have this quite right. During the evening, the police had pieced together within about 14 hours that there'd been a lot of booze drunk, that tequila suicides were being consumed at 9:30 p.m, and that free half-drunk jugs were being given to Mitchell and his drinking partner, presumably because they hadn't had enough to drink, given to them by adults, I might add. However, this is a great picture because there's a sober driver, which was his drinking partner's and boss's girlfriend. And you will have all seen state-sponsored advertisements on TV which show 4 drunk men, young men in a car, and a sober driver, and this is portrayed with your tax dollars as being a good picture. And to be fair, that's a better picture than having 5 drunk young men. But for the reasons, again, that have already been touched on, it remains a bloody disaster, which we'll get to. They got home at midnight, and milking was in 4 hours' time, but all's good, because we had a sober driver, and Mitchell went to bed. And what happens next, it's a little bit of a tricky one to be certain about, because Mitch can't communicate properly, and the other guy's not talking at all. But what we do know is that the other bloke had a fight with his girlfriend, the sober driver, and she locked the car, locked the house, told him to piss off, and unfortunately he did. And he went to Mitchell's house, and a short time later, they drove away in Mitchell's car. And they arrived at the local pub where they had one beer. Apparently, some at the pub tried to stop them driving home, unsuccessfully as it turns out. This is not quite where the car finished, and the evening finished. The car was actually right in the underpass where the cows were trying to get through for milking, so they needed to get the car out of the way once Mitch and his drinking buddy had been sorted out and removed. And the issue is that at a glance, the issue for me, is that at a glance Mitch is just another bloody idiot who drank too much and got in trouble because of it. We've got a slightly different perspective on that because, as mentioned, they had a sober driver, and we spend money on taxpayer ads saying as long as you've got a sober driver, it's all good. Get drunk, fine. Mitch at the time was utterly passionate about his work, which was dairy farming. On a very high-performing property where turning up drunk didn't happen. He caused the boss, that's the real one, not the drinking one, to lose his cell phone one day. They're doing handstands in the mud. And I only bore you with that. It was a super good relationship that he had going on, working very, very hard, just absolutely thriving on it. This was not a young guy who was finding life difficult or unduly challenging. He was just into it and loving it. Again, back to what the police find out in a pretty short time, was the guy that they were drinking with wasn't who or what they had thought he was. So when the plan changed at midnight, Mitchell didn't have the slightest capacity to have a useful conversation. And that happens a hell of a long time before you get to 28 drinks. He had two problems. One, he'd been awake for 20 hours by then. Two, he was profoundly drunk. And three, it was someone 9 years his senior and his boss looking down at him saying whatever was said that made him get out of bed and go to the pub. That's nearly everything, except I did mention issuing a challenge and remind you that Mitchell's mistake that night was to get drunk. It wasn't drink driving, that was just a thing that happened later. But the getting drunk meant that he couldn't think clearly when the rules changed and the plan changed, as they invariably do. Once you're drunk, there are a variety of ways to get into serious trouble. Fights, assault victim, assault aggressor, rape, theft, vandalism, financial, you all stuff your health, you all stuff your relationships, etc., if you keep doing it. I would encourage you, youngsters, but also not so youngsters, in reverse, have a go at talking to each other about this stuff. Use podcast number 37 as the catalyst to support and allow that conversation to come. You will be enormous winners out of that if you can do it. And to the youngsters generally, but both of you here, the youngest and the oldest, to rise above the societal, familial and age-related peer pressure by one very simple, though not easy to start with, objective. And that is be strong and value yourself. I think we've had that talked about by someone a bit closer to your age, so hopefully that one really stuck with you. Love the one in the mirror. If you can't love the one in the mirror, at least put up with them. Accept they're okay. Fake it until you make it. It really matters. For those of you who are not sure, you are all loved. One of the reasons that I'm here is that your principal spoke to my now wife a few years ago about Labour weekend and says, one of the things that haunts me for the next few months until school comes back is how many of my young men / boys are not coming back to school because they had accidents over the summer or they're coming back badly damaged. So you are valued, guys. Don't get pissed, is the other bit that's quite important. And you've heard a few stories already about the different ways things can turn out or not turn out. As a parent, I can tell you when it goes really, really badly wrong, it's really, really tough. And youngsters, to you, I guarantee you do not want to put yourself in the position to put your parents in the position that I find myself in. And once it's gone wrong, it really doesn't matter how you look at it, it stays wrong. I don't see too much chance of that changing. However, this is how I remember Mitch, as a young guy with everything to live for who was just hoeing into life. Made a mistake one night and got let down and paid the price.
Thanks, mate. So as a teacher, I put together a seminar that was supposed to address an issue that was pretty big in our school and in our school community. But it's extremely sobering when you're confronted with the real outcomes of alcohol that these two men have endured. I was incredibly brave to share that. Thanks so much. We're going to be addressed now by Chris Brooks and Darren Cranfield from Wanaka Police. These are men who are in the front line of dealing with people at the wrong end of the stick most days. Things going wrong, but they turn up for work every day. At Christmas time, as I mentioned to you, there were some orchestrated brawls between boys from our school and some other Christchurch schools, organised here in Christchurch, carried out on their patch. I felt very uncomfortable hearing the story. I feel quite uncomfortable in the wake of what Graham's just shared, inviting Chris and Darren to share their stories with us, but they are incredibly important messages. So I invite Chris and Darren for this. I'll just take off there for a second. And where are we? Hold on a minute. See how that comes on screen. Happy now?
Awesome, yep.
Oh, we've gone blank. We've lost it on the screen. Here we are.
Have we got our... yep.
Happy there?
Brilliant, thank you.
Cool.
Kia ora, folks. Look, really appreciate you guys having us up at the school to speak to you all. From our point of view, look, this really resonates with us, what George and Graham have spoken about. We deal with this day in and day out. It's really, really frustrating to see alcohol that ventures into a lot of stuff for us and causes grief and hardship to everyone. So from a police perspective, alcohol probably relates to 95% of our issues. If there was no alcohol in the country, you'd probably have, 500 policemen. That's what you'd sort of need. So why we're here today, Wanaka, Queenstown area obviously attracts a lot of people from Christchurch, Dunedin, to our New Year's Eve parties and what have you. It's a great place to come. Crime is really, really low. It attracts, Wanaka especially attracts the 14 to 17-year-olds. It's a trend at the moment. 18 and above are going to RNA, which is next level up. Obviously, a lot of families come down for holidays and what have you. We get an increase of around 20,000 people at that New Year period, so a lot of pressures on our demand and resources at that time. So Chris and I are responsible for the planning, logistics, and using our resources in a good way for the New Year period. So this year, due to a number of factors, that things have started to get out of hand in the last couple of years. We're going to up the ante on how we deal with it, and hopefully for those that come down here, you take something away from today. Those that don't, obviously there's going to be a couple of points in there that you can take away too. So it's all around the alcohol, how we manage that as parents, how the kids manage it, peer pressure, we've spoken a lot about that. So obviously, Wanaka is deemed safe, so we get parents and what have you coming down. The children are allowed to go and roam, walk into town unsupervised and what have you. So that creates its own risk with that. So you've got alcohol that they're exposed to, drugs. Drugs is another big one. Chris will talk briefly on that shortly. Also, there's a lot of offences. So parents are in the holiday mode. They're having a few drinks. They might meet early with friends and what have you. 2 o'clock in the afternoon, might have a beer. everything gets sort of a wee bit lower and lower in the relaxation stage. The kids, they're heading downtown, they're going to take a couple of beers, probably one part of the brain you spoke about with the parents that isn't quite working properly, jump in the fridge and grab a few beers. They turn up downtown, we catch them coming downtown, they've got bags of booze, they're drinking in the street, all that type of stuff that we all know about. So we don't want to be the fun place and ruin everything. We accept there's got to be some level of enjoyment, and that's with the parents and the kids. So it's just how we manage that effectively. So for the alcohol, it is easily obtained. We've spoken about fake IDs. Very, very easy to get that. We get a number of young children in purchasing alcohol. They've got fake IDs. So I'd say to the parents, check their wallets every now and again, check their pockets and that, because it is a big issue. You'll see their fake IDs that they can order online, or some of them are clever enough they make them. These lads here will probably tell me that, or not. But yeah. The other thing with the alcohol, so it's not just the parents that are over-delivering on that. Sometimes they're getting it from their peers. There's other parents that don't care. So your children might be out with other kids or what have you, whose parents have supplied them with a whole heap of alcohol. All of a sudden they're down at where they congregate downtown, they're all drinking and what have you. The other place they do get it to is your own booze cabinet. So be aware, you've probably a few in the room that are guilty. I'll put my hand up. The booze bottle in the cabinet, Dad would put the wee line on it, you know, so he hasn't touched the booze bottle, it's got the same line on it, but we all know you tip a bit out, top it up with water, you've stolen a bit of Dad's booze, away you go. I'm pretty sure by the time my father drank his last bottle of gin, it was probably 90% water. So bear that in mind, your own stuff, they're going to get it from anywhere, so just sort of keep an eye on that. The other thing that we'll talk about shortly is some of the offences that they commit. And obviously, you're on holiday and what have you, you don't want that ruining your holiday. It's pretty simple stuff. So we'll just have a look at some of the behaviours downtown and the offending. So for those that haven't been there, we probably get a couple of thousand kids coming down into town for the evenings, probably from the 27th through to the 31st. Huge amount of kids. Very, very hard for us to manage them, control them. We try and put them in different areas where we've got lighting and what have you. They tend to end up down on the street in front of, so this is just a wee look downtown, just in front of one of the bars, hangouts. They listen to a bit of free music and that. Don't cause a lot of harm, you know, it's managed as best we can, but you get that number of children, obviously there is always some issues. So we talk about fighting. So last year, or this previous New Year gone, there was a lot of organised fights, and it's not just these colleges here that are mentioned, it's a lot of other groups, but in particular, we did hear about Christ's and Christchurch boys. There was groups fronting up to each other, again, part of the brain not thinking. I don't know what it is, why they do it. It's just what happens, and it's pretty immature, really. So it's something we can probably talk about our children before they go downtown. If you know they're in a group, it's just a quick conversation with your children. Again, it's trying to manage that. So this year we are going to have a lot more enforcement in that area. It certainly wasn't managed as good as we could have managed it. So this year we're going to set up with cameras, mobile cameras that can be monitored non-stop, that are going to hit those hot spots. So the children need to be aware we are going to be locking a few up this year. And coming with that, you're going to get some bail conditions and what have you. So it's going to ruin their night, possibly their parents. You're not going to be going back town. So if you're out there causing a problem, be prepared for some consequences. That's the message we're trying to put across. So if we went through some of the effects or incidents last year. Got some pretty serious stuff happening. We talked about the fights and what have you. Big problem. Also have arterial routes where the children come into town. So there's some main thoroughfares that they come into town. They are drinking, they've left their home, they're drinking. Straight away they're committing an offence. If they're under 18, that's an offence straight away. We'll talk shortly just about the implications for the parents as well. But on the way into town, or probably more so on the way back, we're getting a lot of unnecessary property damage, burglaries. So burglary now, the definition of burglary is, it has changed. So young Johnny's walking home, he sees a bike leaning against a house or in a carport. He decides, right, I'll grab that bike and I'll get home quicker. And this happens. So they go onto the property, boom, they take the bike, that is burglary. So that's a 10-year imprisonable offence. So it's a serious offence. The other stuff we're seeing a lot of is the property damage. So I'll go through a couple of slides here in a second. Just real reckless stuff that doesn't need to be happening. Bottles being thrown through house windows, jumping on cars, smashing car windows, breaking anything they can see. Again, we only get this at this time of the year. So it's probably, for parents, it's a good lesson to talk to the kids about it. You get any convictions for that sort of stuff, or any drugs or anything like that, high chance you're not going to go overseas, or it might impact you on your sporting career or what have you. So good, just good messaging to give them out. We talk about immigration, like when they get to the border, and they've got that on there, they've got to declare it if you've got an offence or a conviction. Immigration don't care about your excuses. It's just black and white, bang, you mightn't be coming anywhere else. So bear that in mind. So here's some of the property damage. This is a vehicle. There's 5 of these vehicles deliberately damaged on a property. Just reckless stuff. Classed as burglary because they've gone onto someone's property, out on the road, kicked the wing mirrors off, smashed the front screen. This is a house, so this is some poor person's house, is walking home, boom, a bottle through the window. With these property damages, we have a forensic team that turns up the next day, a SOCO team, right? So we gather the evidence, the bottle and what have you, we swab it, take the fingerprints off it, that stuff remains with us. So we have that evidence, even though they're a young person and we might not have their profile in our data bank as yet, down the track, they might do something else wrong that's going to pop up and bite them. So another thing just to talk to them about, consequences, what you do on the night could hit you in 10 years' time. So letterboxes, now this is, for some reason, I do not know why, but a letterbox is the big favourite. We can get a street where kids have walked home down a street and we could have 10, 15 letterboxes all kicked over, so yeah. So just if we flick over to another independent group, apart from getting my perspective, Red Frogs, I don't know how many of you guys have heard of Red Frogs, but they sort of attend all of the big functions throughout New Zealand, all voluntary, and they're a fantastic group, and they're there to help your kids. They need to set up a safe zone, which is, because they find so much alcohol and drunkenness and what have you, they set up a safe zone prior to the event so they can deal with it. So if we read through, they give us a report at the end of the year, so if we just read through a couple of the comments on this. So remember, this is a volunteer who's come in to help people. You read the first comment, a patron, what's a young person that's at their event, has approached them, touched the female Red Frog crew member's breasts, in addition has made sexual advances towards her. Okay, so pretty appalling behaviour. Another one here, female found she'd lost her phone in the lake, no wallet, she'd fallen asleep for about 3 hours. For those that are letting their children go out, you need to get that message that they stick together, and you need to give that to them as a group, not just your daughter or your son. get them all in, have that chat to them and tell them, you look after each other. This sort of stuff is not good. We get, for the last 2-3 years, we've had serious sexual complaints come in due to this sort of thing. And again, just on that note, it's something that everyone needs to be aware of consensual activity. If you get someone who's in this position where they're intoxicated, they're not in a position to give consent. So the next day, when they're sober, we get the phone call, or they come down to the station, and all of a sudden there's a very, very serious allegation made. And that can have a fallout for a long, long time for the children involved, the families involved. It puts a lot of pressure, a lot of heartache on everyone. So again, it's probably something the school can talk through with the young boys. Consent is a biggie. You need to make sure you know what you're doing there. Similar type thing here. Girl was at the dinosaur park again. She'd been left alone. She's alleged that a male approached her and has, inappropriately touched her without her consent. So just on their reports, so they came to us over a 3-day period. They had 115 recorded incidents. So that's only the incidents that they deem significant, where they've felt that they need to note that and report it. So for us, that's a really, really high number. Hence, we're going to make some big changes this year. So other things that they spoke about, again, these are the volunteers. They're giving out free food, water, caring for people. They're getting one instance where they're making pancakes for everyone. The boys had grabbed a whole heap of pancakes and started throwing them at them. Just ridiculous stuff. So another incident was a female in a crowd. Another girl threw a bottle into the crowd, hit her, split her head open. Ports of vomiting, intox, all that stuff that we're gonna hear about. So here's our patrons here. The Red Frog's just caring for people. In the shows how like caring they are. Like you've got all that abuse and what have you, but they're still out there helping out everyone. So, and if you just look at that, we look at the bottom comment. This is on their report. So overall, alcohol intoxication is down, but there is an increase with drug use. And Chris will speak to you about that. But drug use is very, very big in Wanaka and Queenstown for Mdma. And we'll just quickly, this is some of the stuff that this year, look, we saw a bit of it last year, of infringement notices that were handed out. The message we want to get out this year is, if you come into the public area with alcohol, you're going to get a fine. Okay, so it's going to hit home this year. So, alcohol for an under 18-year-old in a public place, they're not allowed it unless they're supervised. Possession of alcohol in a banned area, we all know that one. Consuming alcohol in a banned area, they all do it. We turn up there, they've got a backpack on, it's pretty obvious, and you go, come here, next thing, boom, they bolt, and all you hear is their bag rattling and jingling, and away they go. So, we'll be a bit more proactive on that. The other thing is, parents are letting them come into town, right? So, with alcohol, we're not saying they're all giving that alcohol freely, but they're certainly coming in. So, for the parents, just to be aware, the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act, Section 241, makes you liable for supplying a minor or under 18 with alcohol. It's got to be done. There is a bit of a leadway. We're not going to say, right, you've given them 2 cans of beer or what have you. You're going to court. That's what it is. It's a court appearance. But what you've got to consider is what the courts will consider. Rather is what steps you've taken to supervise them. What food you've provided, whether it's you've offered low alcohol, non-alcoholic, the strength of the alcohol that you've given them, the amount of the alcohol. That's a that's probably the key, is the amount and the strength. Obviously, what the occasion is, and also what period of time you've given them that alcohol to consume. And the other one is obviously the age. So what we've been trying to promote, and it's hard because we understand parents are down there to have a good time as well. What we're really, really trying to encourage is the children come down, you get them in the groups, the parents come down in a group. You don't have to sit there and babysit them and spy on them non-stop. Parents might go into town and have a couple of beers at a bar or whatever, but it's good if you're close by. You can pop out, check that the kids are all right. You go as a group, don't go as one parent, go and singling out your child, because that's going to be a no-no. Child won't speak to you for the rest of the holiday. So go in the groups and what have you. Just do those wee bits and pieces you can to mitigate the risk to your children, because we've heard some pretty telling stories here. We see it way too often, and and it doesn't always have to be like that. So what we can do to help, we're trying to help. We're not trying to be the big bullies as such. We're trying to help. So hopefully someone, take a message away from that. So Chris will have a speech on drugs.
Evening, everybody. Chris Brooks, Sergeant at Queenstown. Grew up here in Christchurch. In fact, it's the first time I've worn my uniform since I left after the earthquakes. I was the Christchurch Beat Sergeant, and I was also the Public Order Sergeant that covered the Canterbury District, that attended all the parties, or helped finish them, some would say. Talk to you about drugs. I don't know if a fact that, do you remember when you were all in level 4 lockdown? We were still catching people in Queenstown and Wanaka. The people we were catching were drug dealers, because they needed to sell their product, and there were people out there willing to buy it. So we were doing checkpoints in Terrace, back of Wanaka, the Kingston Queenstown Road, and getting some quite good catches and information that led to some amazing search warrants. If you can't pronounce the name, boys, I don't reckon you should take it. Have a crack at that one. That's one of our most common drugs in Queenstown and Wanaka. Even though the two stations are separated by the Crown Range, we share one thing in common, and that is a lovely looking pill with various shapes and pictures on it. Mdma, it's called. There's various nicknames for it, and it gives you some amazing feelings. That's if you don't mix it with alcohol. But one of the things, if you look down the list, and I've highlighted it, that it does make you feel, it gives you a sense of intimacy with others, it says. But perhaps that other person's not willing to accept that intimacy. The Southern District, we're really good at taking MDMA. In fact, most of the time, we're the highest users of it in the country. We taste the wastewater as it disappears into the sewage ponds, and we know on a regular basis that we achieve great results for the country and how much we use, particularly at events, actually. For example, we get spikes at Orientation Week, funnily enough, down in Dunedin. At any of the music events around the Queenstown or Wanaka area, huge spikes in the wastewater. And a lot of it's obviously to do with MDMA. I had a great talk from a company called Know Your Stuff, and the lady had a crack at us, actually, the police, put all this effort into stopping people getting into the venues with their drugs. And she says, well, why are you wasting your time? It's already in. And she's right, it's already inside the venues. So now we spend as much time as we can with Know Your Stuff, trying to convince people that just get it tested before you try it. Because maybe when they tell you what the ingredients are, you might not take it. These are some of the headlines, the Queenstown headlines. Jail for drug dealing backpacker found with $117,000 cash in Queenstown. That was a dorm room, and he had a couple of tins under his bed. He was one of 2 tourists that were on a working visa in Queenstown, and he had a drug supermarket under his bed. And he was targeting boys like you because he knew that you were drunk, and he knew that he could sell you a $40 pill, cheaper than quite a few drinks that you could get in Queenstown, and make you feel good for a while. But what he wouldn't tell you is the ingredients that were inside it. In fact, he probably didn't know himself. He spent some time in our area hurting people through his business. Eventually we caught him. In fact, he's still in the country as of today, but he has been deported, or will be shortly. Another headline there is the arrest linked to Queenstown drug ring, and of course the other one, drug and cash seized following search warrants in Queenstown. Since August last year, probably 18 search warrants, I think, we've done in particular around drugs in that area. These are people that look like you and I, actually. They dress nicely, but they are going around the bars and nightclubs before the police get out, actually. A lot of them are saying that they're doing their business before 9 p.m, and they're trying to find boys like you that are walking the streets, that are prepared to spend a bit of money and have a quick fix. That there is one of the search warrants we did. They're Skittle packets, and they were chock-a-block full of Mdma pills. The search warrant resulted in 2,500 Mdma pills seized with $1,000 of cash. I'm not sure if you can see that, but it's text data. So we did a search warrant on a drug dealer's phone. He was living near the high school, and he was targeting boys like you in uniform. And the student said that he'd like to come round and buy some drugs, but he was still at school, and he could come round about 3:10 to pick him up. And down the bottom of the text data, you can see that he got told off by the supplier for turning up in his uniform. So next time he'll make sure he leaves his uniform at home. We got him, but he'd already hurt a few people. Drugs and alcohol mixed together, it lowers your inhibitions. Over at the rural ambulance service that we have in Queenstown and Wanaka, it runs them ragged, and now we're using police cars to take young men and women to hospital. Check out that website if you can. It's called highalert.org.nz. It's got great information to parents, to organisations, and it's very practical, and it tells you about signs about your son or daughter that may have changed in their behaviour for some reason. Have a read, see if it fits. What it also does, though, is if you put your email address in that website, it will alert you to bad drugs that are in the area. That's why it's called High Alert. So, for example, I put my work address in there, and it told me recently that there was cannabis in the middle of the North Island that was being sprayed with a certain chemical that was causing people to be sick and die. So I made sure I kept a lookout for that when I was on the beat in Queenstown. highalert.org.nz. Great information, and it's linked into the New Zealand Drug Foundation. So that's a quick bit on MDMA. But on the 27th of December, I was walking the beat in Queenstown, and the first job came over the radio about a large fight in Wanaka at the dinosaur park. Well, I don't know if you've been to Wanaka and seen the dinosaur park, but it's got a big concrete dinosaur in it that's now painted. And you know it's not going to be a good week when you start getting fights at the dinosaur park, right? That didn't stop. 28th, the 29th, the 30th, and the 31st. Boys fighting each other in the streets, with police officers standing in the middle of the road keeping them apart. We can't arrest ourselves out of this problem. There is no point filling up the cells full of young men and women. So we rely on you, and we rely on you boys to make some good decisions. Thanks a lot.
Just a quick bit of technical stuff one last time. Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Chris, very much for that. The messages that are coming through are pretty loud and clear, really, aren't they? That things don't happen in isolation. One thing that's becoming pretty clear from a lot of what we're hearing tonight is the need for conversation. Just talking, being honest at home, talking things through can open a lot more lines of communication that really are necessary. Just very quickly trying to find a point here. Wanted to apologise also to the ladies in the room for the fact that we're all men on stage. Miriam Chittenden was expected to be here tonight, but unfortunately she was with the Wanaka Police crew, but she was unable to be here for just some things that have cropped up for her. But the message is not just one for boys or from men. It really is about making sure that those of us who are in a position to share our expertise do so. I had quite a conversation with the clinical director at the A&E department. I'm just struggling to get this to come up on the screen. For some reason we've lost the link. Mark Gilbert was going to be here this evening, but unfortunately he and others were just otherwise committed. But he has shared with me some information. If I can't get it on screen, it's not going to be a great loss, although one or two things might be. I just wonder whether Brett might be upstairs and could possibly pop down quickly. He's just on his way. So what Mark did share with me was the situation that they endure at A&E on a weekend. I haven't disclosed this very much to people in this school, but I live with a heart condition that brings on atrial fibrillation for me. And when that occurs, my heart goes out of rhythm. And on different occasions, when it's pretty bad, I have to go into hospital. I've been in hospital in the A&E department on 2 separate weekend nights in the course of the time I've been living with this. And on more than one occasion, I've been in there when young people have been brought in to have their stomachs pumped. It's very distressing for my family that I'm lying there as uncomfortable as I am. My heart's beating as though I've just run up a big hill. And I'm in a position where I'm having to wait because somebody who's willingly taken alcohol in great amounts, I just can't get this PowerPoint up, sorry. It's not coming on the screen at all. Just doing that. Yeah, the people are willingly putting this stuff into their system, and I'm lying there in a hospital bed, and I'm relatively well, but there are people lying around me who've come in from car crashes and things like that. Thanks very much, mate. And they are taking precedence over people who've done nothing to themselves but be in accidents. It's very sobering when you're in the situation where young people and their friends who are also pretty out of it are really angry and aggressive with the A&E staff. The nurses, I mean, the police officers have spoken to us tonight about the sort of stuff they put up with. The nursing staff confront this on a daily basis. And like Chris and Darren have said, Mark shared with me the fact that 85% of all their weekend admissions are alcohol-related, alcohol or drug-related. It's an extraordinary amount of harm that alcohol is doing. So the sort of stuff that he talked about was how much that is happening. The 3 groups that are most affected by alcohol, obviously those who are drunk. The friends are worried and their friends have called an ambulance. So that's a bit of a no-brainer. Yes, our friend is absolutely unwell, you need to come and help. So cart them off to hospital. The next group of people who have suffered trauma because they've been drinking and they've fallen down. They've cut themselves, they've hurt themselves, or they've damaged, maybe fallen through a window or something like that. They come in with some pretty bad abrasions. And the third group are those who come in drink driving accidents. All related, all tied together by alcohol. But then there's this group. Those who aren't drunk, those who are trying to do the right thing, but because of a decision they've made about being in the wrong place, have got themselves assaulted by a drunk person. That's the other side of this that's worth thinking about. If you are where people are drinking heavily and it's not a safe place for you, don't be there. Make a conscious choice to move. So how do we stop real harm? Well, it was a really salutary message that Mark gave me about this idea of stacking up problems. And when I put these things down on screen here, you'll start to see what he's meaning. When you get a young boy, that's one thing. When he's in a group, he's emboldened. He's got a little bit more hubris about himself. Then you give him some alcohol in that group. And then you expose him to social media and how much fun that is to share. And then you put a car in the mix. That's bad enough. You're looking for trouble. Beyond that, you get a restricted licence, or a restricted licence holder that's driving that car. Get a gravel road, and inevitably you're going to find another car. Now, this is coming from the hospital. This is not me trying to be dramatic here. But an extraordinary number of their evenings deal with this, where somebody who's been drinking comes round because they're being brought back to their senses in the A&E ward, and it's made clear to them that they have killed someone. And that's a life sentence. It deprives someone's family of a loved one, and they are now living with the burden that could have been avoided if there'd been a more sensible decision made around alcohol. The effects are wide. They're on parents, they're on friends, and they're on the school community. And I want to make this point really clearly to you guys who are here particularly. This is not us as a school worrying about how we look in our community. This is us worried about whether or not we are doing what our community needs us to do to help you get a better perspective on what this stuff does. It's not about us telling you that you can't have fun in your life. And it's not about us saying that you should ban alcohol from your existence. That would be that brick wall parenting style that Nathan was talking about. This is about keeping open lines of communication. A&E staff are really resilient. They put up, if you're a nurse or a doctor and you're working in the hospital, you opt to work at A&E, you are asking for the most demanding confrontational shifts that you can come up against, because people are going in very, very mixed states of consciousness. As resilient as they are, Mark asked me to point out that there is still a really detrimental effect on the well-being of those people. And what it comes back to is often some of these factors that are within our control. Parents being naive enough to believe that their kid is not someone who's going to go and do the wrong thing. And we know our kids if we talk to them. We know our kids if we know their friends. We know our kids if we know their friends' parents. But turning your eyes away from that is suggestive of this level of naivety that Mark is talking about. And often he deals with parents who come in and say, I had simply no idea. He told me he was going to the pictures, he turns up in Culverden. What's that about? He made the point that abuse of alcohol, when it's repeated, leads to dependency. So the more you expose yourself to harmful drinking, the greater the risk that you will not be able to turn your back on that harmful drinking when it is a potential factor in your evening. And he wanted people to be aware that it's alcohol, notwithstanding what Chris has just shared with us about drugs, it is alcohol at A&E in Christchurch that is doing more harm than all the other drugs and intoxicants put together. Because it is so accessible, because it is the legal intoxicant, because it is so available to boys and girls who are too young to be having it in the amounts that they're having. As part of the discussions that I had with those boys around fake IDs last year, this statement came up. And I'd never heard it before. But I was told that what was happening at parties was boys who were going to parties where other older boys, high boys were, or old boys to be fair, were reminded that there is a bit of an ethic around this. If you're at boys high, then you better drink boys high hard. It's a very confronting statement, I think. But it made me think about what happens when boys in whose company I've been have been drinking hard. It's not boys who have been at parties that I've chosen to go to. That's where I have come across these guys in the evenings where they are out and about. These are the things that they are apt to be when they are drinking hard. They get homophobic. everything's gay, everyone's a faggot. I can't stand those terms. They get aggressive. They're in your face. They're in each other's faces, and they feel they need to stand up for what they want to be seen as. They get racist. And they get destructive. If that's drinking boys high hard, I don't want to have any part of that. I don't want any boys that I'm working with to have any part of that. That's stuff that we need to avoid. But tonight isn't about telling parents that you're getting it wrong. Tonight it's not about telling boys you're never going to go through life well if you take alcohol. This is about dealing with the pressure to drink as well. We've been talking as much about the facts as we have shared some of the strategies that you might need to use. And dealing with the pressure to drink, I think, really does come down to just a few simple things. You need to be in control of the things that you decide in life. You should be the one who tells people you will do this, not be influenced by other people telling you that you'd better do that so that you're like them. You need to keep your parents in the loop. And if you are a parent, you need to keep those conversations going. The more open you are, the better the chances that the outcomes will be good. The better the chances, as Nathan said, that you'll engage that frontal cortex and actually keep the emotions at bay and the logic to the fore. If you are going out and you know you're going to be where drink is happening and you're planning on having something to drink, make sure that you've planned your responses. Know what you are going to say before you go there. Have the line, actually, mate, thanks, I play a bit of sport, I'll be right. No, my coach would be spastic at me if I had a lot tonight, so no, I'm going to have 2 and that's going to do it. Have those lines sorted. Use body language that says no. Don't go, yeah, well, nah. Be staunch about that. I'm not doing that. Thanks anyway. But if you're my mate, you'll understand no means no. And make sure you do this. Associate with friends that you can rely on. When you get yourself in a bad way, they're there for you. They're either sober enough to make a better decision than you, or they're sensible enough to remind you that you're actually better than you're being in the moment. We have got a problem. The outcome of surveys conducted at Christchurch Girls High School recently has confronted a lot of us. And as much as this isn't even about alcohol, it would be remiss of me not to mention how appalled this school's community is about what those girls at our sister school have gone through. What girls in schools around this country go through. And it comes down to simply respect. It comes down to being able to look others in the eye and acknowledge their right to be themselves, to be who they are and who they want to be. That's what guys are doing when they're out partying with you. They want you to accept them for who they are, and that's fine. But if alcohol is clouding their ability to be the best version of themselves, be their mate. Stand up for them when they can't stand up. Like I said, tonight hasn't been, I hope, about putting anybody in their place. It's supposed to be an occasion in which we've prompted thought. We started the need for conversations, hopefully regenerated the value of conversations in families, and reminded you all that while alcohol is a legal intoxicant, it doesn't have to be the thing that completely rules our lives. There are issues of overuse and addiction in New Zealand, not just at Christchurch Boys High School, but I have a particular brief to work with the boys who are in my area of guidance in the school, and I wanted to make a start on that. If you can carry the conversations on at home to vindicate the value of these good men's input into this evening, then we will have gone a long way to at least lifting the lid on this pretty ordinary culture. Could I invite you to think, along with me, Nathan, Mata, George, Graham, Chris, who's at the back of the hall, I think, and Darren, for their presentations tonight. It's been wonderful. Thanks. I'd like to thank you very much indeed for attending this evening, showing this much interest in your son's welfare. Boys who've been here, for showing the interest in your own welfare is a great vindication of what we're trying to do. I genuinely appreciate and I'm deeply grateful for your attendance. I hope you have a safe trip home and stay as warm as you can. Thanks so much indeed. Good night.